There was a little bit of a discussion that was going on in the Delegate Slack channel Friday while we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with this time. And it actually, something came up. I recorded a really great tech talk with Sam Clements yesterday that you'll see on gestaltit.com very soon. But it comes back to troubleshooting. It's always the Wi-Fi, right? No, wait, it's always DNS. No, maybe it was DHCP this time. Now, do you know what I just sounded like to your average user? Charlie Brown teacher. Yeah. DNHCPS Wi-Fi. That's the new one, right? Is that better than 7? Like, they don't know. And honestly, they don't care because the network's down. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about how we take the mythical mastery of troubleshooting that we do and make it seem more accessible to people so that they can help start diagnosing some of their own problems.
I'll start.
Okay.
It's an art, right? Part of being good in technology is understanding not just what the problems are, but being able to articulate that to somebody who doesn't understand what it is you're talking about. Like a good mechanic can distill down to you enough information about what's wrong with your car so that you can make an educated decision. And oh, by the way, you tend to be plugged in, engaged, and part of that decision-making process. It's the same thing. And oh, by the way, you might actually find out that you get more information from somebody that you've built a relationship with, and that might be relevant to whatever it is you're trying to do.
Okay.
Fix the problem.
So we want people to be engaged.
Yeah, no doubt.
But we're always using technical jargon. Quick question. None of you are medical professionals, right? At least that I know of. Although a lot of you were like lawyers at one point or wanted to be lawyers. Do you ever get that feeling when you go to the doctor that they start throwing out test results and you're like, I don't understand any of these numbers? It's kind of how most people feel. Like the same feeling they get when they go to the doctor is the same feeling they get when we're trying to tell them why Slack is running a little weird today. Can we fix this problem and make troubleshooting easier by getting rid of a lot of that ridiculous terminology that nobody seems to care about except for us when we need to regurgitate it for a certification exam?
From my perspective, I mean, understanding, how to communicate in a common language with your customer is key. And being able to, meet them where they are, right? I mean, all conflict is fundamentally at the root unmet expectations. They're usually uncommunicated, right? And with networking, they have an expectation that it's just going to work. And, I've had reports that the internet's down or the Wi-Fi's down. And it turns out it's just the one site that happened to be down. Their load balancer, firewall, whatever on the other end wasn't working, right? Just happened to be the most important site for that user at that time, right? But being able to, walk through them and show them, look, it's not the entire internet. We're able to go to all these other places. It's just that site that buys you a lot of grace and whatnot. But I've seen, being able to communicate with people where they are is critical to building that relationship, to building the trust, and then they'll communicate back to you with, hey, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm observing.
Hopefully. Right.
It happens most of the time for me. So.
Lee?
From my perspective, one of the best things that you can do is anybody else who's supporting the network or the help desk type people, just ongoing education. Everything feels like a Wi-Fi problem to a Wi-Fi user. 5% of the time it's actually the Wi-Fi. Usually it's something else. The better the data that you give us based on what you're feeling and when you're feeling at a timestamp, where you were when it happened in this big busy wireless environment, the quicker we're going to be able to get to the point. Is it Wi-Fi? Is it something else? And go figure out that something else. But to put in the Wi-Fi network, be extremely proud of it, know that it's solid, wonderful, blah, 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 and then never do the people side of it. Network is probably not the issue, probably won't be the issue. It's usually going to be something else. And to have those ongoing conversations, you're always going to be coming back to something's not right. The Wi-Fi sucks. So, there's definitely a non-technical people communication side of, the whole thing.
Yeah, and I kind of want to follow up with that. I mean, taking the time to walk either your end user services, your help desk people, or newer network engineers through the process of what you do, because helping them get a little bit educated. I mean, Wi-Fi is totally magical to a lot of people, even within IT. They don't know how it works at all. And so, yeah, it can be painful, but if you help to bring them along, impart a little bit of knowledge, kind of get them excited a little bit, then they can take some of those, the low-hanging fruit troubleshooting step, right? Like, is the DHT pool exhausted for whatever reason, or something along those lines, or is their password? You know how many Wi-Fi issues or AD accounts that are locked out, right? Like something like that. So helping them kind of understand what are some of the basic things that I do, keep stuff off my desk,
And
helps them out.
the more you reach across those lines to the sysadmins, to the wired folks, to the SD-WAN folks, the more you engage those folks on behalf of the user who's complaining, the more they're going to turn around and engage you when something doesn't look right, from their perspective.
So I think, to Sam's point and Mike's point, is the industry has shifted to a kind of siloed approach, right? Where if you go back to Keith's days of Novell, you did everything, right, end to end. Today, you've got the Wi-Fi guy, you've got the network guy, you've got the voice guy, you've got the AD dude. The problem is, and then when anything goes wrong, it becomes and there's no one that can bridge the gap, right? So those people have become rare. And because again, the user experience is, it happened on the Wi-Fi, therefore it has to be the Wi-Fi. 9 out of 10 times, DNS, shots fired, right? But what do you call it? The art is understanding the end-to-end flow. So as much as you might not be an expert in everything, the end-to-end flow is important, all the way down to that supplicant and its drivers.
I think it's very important to meet people where they're at, as Daryl's describing. If you're deep into Wi-Fi, it's very obvious for us why it doesn't make sense to use other channels than 1, 6, and 11. But if you don't know anything about Wi-Fi and you do a quick scan and you see someone not using channel 3, why wouldn't you pick channel 3? No one else is on that channel, right? So understanding where people are coming from, help passing on that knowledge and that information. Also, when talking to people, for me personally, it doesn't matter to me whether you say WAP or AP, right? It's the same thing. We're talking about it, so I understand where you're coming from. What I find interesting, if we start talking about spectrum analyzers, people with different backgrounds will shorten that long word into something different. Wi-Fi people that have been entrenched in Wi-Fi often call it a spec-an. On the cellular side, they'll call it a spec-A. Often if you have the military background, it'll be intimately referred to as ANI. Right, so just using those names and then relating to that, we can talk about different things that I don't necessarily have to re-educate and have everyone conform to my language. I'll adapt to make the conversations easier.
And that's what makes a successful organization ultimately. You said something about, the organizations are siloed, and I would, and there is no sort of cross-silo engagement. I would argue that successful organizations are organizations that have figured out how to do that across silo communication and bring people along. 100%.
Well, I'm sharing a slide up there that is the problem that we have to deal with is any one of these little bubbles is a potential problem. And we understand that it could be DNS or DHCP or radius or applications or something on the WAN. All of those are things we need to do. But what I think what you're saying, Sam, is we need to coalesce this complexity down to solving their problem. We don't need to tell them which bucket it's in.
Well,
but as the troubleshooter, you need to know which bucket it's in, because you can't fix a DNS problem by adding another access point. So I think we as the implementers of fixing the problem need to understand what's going on, but we need to have the ability to extract, and our communications with the end user are in their language. They want to call it a WAP. I'll call it a WAP.
I actually want to talk about that slide because it points out something really important. And I read this amazing book from Robert Graham, Errata Rob, on most social media platforms. If you don't follow him, you should. Can you guys tell me where those fall on the OSI model?
Yes.
The trick question.
Somewhere between layer 1 and 7.
So Rob's book It's about 200 pages long. It's freely available. If you follow him on Mastodon, he literally just tweeted a link to it about 3 weeks ago. I love basically the opening thing is the OSI model is outdated, wrong, and should never ever be taught again. And I'll tell you why. The Wi-Fi is down, right? 99 times out of 100, what are they actually trying to get to?
The internet.
Internet.
To them, there is
and
no
applications.
difference between the Wi-Fi and the internet. But to anyone who is a learned networking professional, we know that you can actually communicate with devices in a local network and never go to the internet. I can run devices in my house with no WAN connection. I can run devices in my house without an IP address. It is possible, kiddos. We did have networking before TCP/IP. However, we have intrinsically linked all of those things together. On this slide that Keith is showing, we have a local network. I would argue you probably need DHCP for most network communications today. But everything to the right of that is internet stuff. And we can't teach professionals how to separate those two things. Once this leaves my local network, once I am no longer broadcasting frames out of a switch, it's not a network problem. It's an internet problem, which means it's an internet services problem, or it's an internet pathway problem. And how much of our time do we have to spend troubleshooting which server's not working today? Or I kind of referenced Slack being slow. I don't know if you guys remember a couple of years ago, everybody came back into the office on January 5th and one of Amazon's transit gateways fell over, which meant the entire internet was running slow for about 3 hours. And everyone's like, oh man, I'm sure they got lots of Wi-Fi is down calls on the first Monday back from the holiday. No, it was not the Wi-Fi. It was Amazon's fault. But how do you explain that to people? Because they don't know that. They see the cloudy part and go network or Wi-Fi.
We should acknowledge the fact that we're fortunate enough that our technology has become ubiquitous with the network in standard lexicon, right? In common tongue. When it is, you don't hear about the data center folks or the people who are doing, server admin or the AD folks. There's no way that their thing has entered the common language, right? People don't talk about other than the server.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's great because we get the privilege of owning the network to the common man. And that's something that I think that we should probably A, openly acknowledge, but B, we should probably respect that a little bit more than what we do.
Yeah.
It's one of those backhanded compliments.
It is. It very much is. Yeah.
And we should take it that way, as in, one of the things we can do, and I've been training people for years, is how do you tell, is it wired or wireless? Is it ours or is it theirs? We need to know that, but we don't have to, we can't use that as an excuse. Oh, it's not wireless. And it feels really good to say that because you can prove it. See, and there's techniques we can ping to the Wi-Fi client from someplace else on the local network and the ping works. So obviously we're talking, it's not the Wi-Fi, but that doesn't solve the problem. So we need to be able to take that. And I think it's all about the communication. How do you speak in their language? How do you help them solve the problem? But you also need to know how it actually works, because if you don't know all the little bubbles and where the failure is, you won't be able to fix it.
I look at it a little differently than that, Keith. Like, each one of these things can be and should be monitored. And as you scale things up, right? Yes. You should be able to know when they're going to break before they break, right?
Oh.
Like, on a typical day, how many DHCP transactions am I going to do? Do those come in all at once, right? Well, if the whole power to the whole building goes out, right? Everybody's going to come back online and DHCP is going to get hammered, right? All at once. So is your DHCP environment scaled large enough for that? Same thing with DNS, radius. All of these things should have, some type of trending, and, when there's an abnormal day or behavior, we should know about that ahead of time. If you're operating the entire network or as an organization, you should be looking at most of these things. DHCP, DNS, your WAN router, all of those are very easy to graph, to look at. Ybot had, I think, all of these things actually from yesterday, right? it
we
could
should
report out.
implement these things. We should
Yeah.
watch them, right? These are all tools that the Wi-Fi professionals should be using to complete that
And,
conversation.
and on top of this layer, there's time.
Oh, and then there's layer 8 above it all,
Oh, yeah.
right? Which is even worse.
But it's also not just
Except we're
time.
not doing layers anymore.
But I mean, sometimes you've got these things independently monitored by their little entities. So now what happens is, like, to your point is, let's say, for example, remote branch connectivity, slow WAN link, but functional. You've got people failing authentication. The backend issue is a AD lookup from the radius server. So where do you see that on the monitoring platform? Because how many people are actually doing LDAP lookups from the machines to actually give you that reflection? So people are going to blame the Wi-Fi straight at the radius server, but actually it's the lookup in the backend, right? And it could be in a pool of domain controllers sitting with like 4 of them. One of them is the ugly duckling.
But if you're monitoring, your overall 802.1x authentications, and all of a sudden it drops, right, by a quarter or 30% or whatever, there's a problem, right? Then you can start looking at what that is, right?
That's why I say from people that understand the stuff end to end, it's easier. But as soon as it becomes outside of the user communication, once it comes to the back-end troubleshooting, where you got to go to your security colleagues and say, can we check the file? It's not the file. Can you call AD? These guys they aren't always, let's call it accommodating, right? And then it ends up being a war room until someone actually draws the picture out and says, but this is how your technology actually works. Oh, it could be us, right? And then articulating that to the user in the end, you want to just give them an analogy version of it.
There's another thing that's kind of inherent in what you just said, and it's another important point to this troubleshooting process. When I was growing up, I liked to help my mom bake. And one of the things that my mom would tell me is, even though the recipe says that you should add the things in order, never add the eggs before you add melted butter. And I could never figure out why until I did it one time on accident. By the way, it's a great way to get scrambled eggs in a pie. Institutional knowledge. Mom knew this because mom did it once. The recipe book never got, adjusted. How many of you in here know what you need to do to an interface right after you configure a tunnel on it? You need to drop the MTU size, otherwise no traffic's going to go across the tunnel, because the tunnel headers are going to make it too big and it's going to start fragmenting. We were talking about this in the car day before yesterday. But did we all know that? Is that written down somewhere? Is there a pop-up whenever you configure a tunnel that goes, hey, did you change the MTU size so your traffic's going to go across it? I feel like a lot of the things that we do in troubleshooting are institutional knowledge of, oh yeah, I did this one time and it worked. And then nobody writes it down. Or worse yet, that communication never gets back to people who know this. I mean, I used to troubleshoot computers for Gateway. Yeah, the cow company. And half of our source, if you want to call it that, was, oh, hey, we closed a ticket one time and fixed it like this. And it took months for those things to get put back into the source. So how do we prevent institutional knowledge from basically disappearing or becoming locked in place where I have to go to Sam every time, because every time I go to Sam, this fixes the problem? Well, now anybody who's read the Phoenix Project knows where we're going next. Sam is Brent. He is the blocker for all work that has to happen, because nothing can happen unless Sam fixes it.
Story of my life.
And maybe not because Sam is being malicious and trying to hoard the information. It's just he doesn't have the time to write it down. And he's like, okay, I need you guys to know that when you do this thing and you configure this part, you need to change this setting. How do we fix the institutional knowledge problem? The answer, of course, is write a blog about it. But I want to hear what you have to say.
I would like on that blog note, just to say, we all hear blog. How many of you ever Googled a question and your own blog came as the answer?
I'll do you one worse. I Googled my question, couldn't find my answer, went to my friends. They found my blog post and sent it back to me.
Okay.
Wait, are you Denver Coder 7? For those of you who don't know what that is, you should Google XKCD Denver Coder. It is one of the greatest comics of all time, because it's absolutely true.
The reason I want to bring that up and to show the audience and all of us is you need to blog because your brain can't hold it all.
Yeah, it's true.
And I find my own answers in my own blogs, which means at one point in time it was in here,
Yeah.
and it's not. So yeah, that's how you save that institutional knowledge.
I go back to stuff I wrote like 10 years ago. I'm like, man, I was really smart at one point. but yeah, that's one of those things. And I am now the parent of a new Eagle Scout as of last night.
Congratulations.
And God bless the child. He is me at 17. So he knows everything and he can talk his way out of anything. And so I'm trying to get him to write stuff down in his project workbook. He goes, Dad, why am I going to write this down if you're just going to ask me questions about it? I'm like, because you will forget, because you are my child. But more importantly, if you write it down, they don't have to ask the question. And that's one of the things that we see a lot. A lot of times we don't even ask the question out loud. We just go to Google and see if we can find the result, right? Like, I don't know what this acronym means, or I have never seen this problem occur. Here is a really odd error message. And we used to joke at Gateway that if we had a nickel for every time we used Google to solve one of our customers' problems, we wouldn't need to work on the help desk anymore because we'd have a lot of nickels. But that only works when we're willing to share that knowledge with people. And I alluded to it when I was talking to Sam, but there are actually people out there that refuse to share that knowledge with anybody else because as long as I know it and nobody else does,
You're valuable.
I'm unfireable.
Yeah.
One of my mentors, Renee Mullins, when she worked at IBM, said, if you make yourself unfireable, you make yourself unpromotable. Because you can never leave that job now. And I was like, whoa, that's deep.
It's not just that.
What?
It's not just that. You can't take a vacation. You can't take a day off.
Yeah.
You can't be where your phone is off because everything they have to call you. And that's,
Not a good place to be.
to me, that's unbearable.
So how do we deal with those people in an organization? How do we convince them to let go of that knowledge?
I'm not entirely sure that somebody who hasn't gone through that understands just the level of intensity of that conversation. You have to have gray in your beard and experience I'm proud of my thing. I want to hold the keys to my own kingdom. I want to be responsible for my own destiny. We all go through it at some point in our careers. At least I know I did. And it wasn't until I got some experience and realized that, that's going to bite you in the ass real bad one day. It's not until those bad things happen to you that you sort of level set and go, wait, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And there are plenty of folks in government who never learned that lesson.
Yeah.
And I think that you can see the example of what happens when people don't get bit by that. They become very, very complacent.
And they go to work at the DMV.
I have specialized knowledge that nobody else has. Therefore, everyone must come to me to do the job. And I can get away with doing one job. I would argue that we see it a little less in IT than anywhere else because a lot of times, aside from the silos that Shannon was talking about, we're usually doing a lot of other things. As much as you guys might like it, you're not spectrum experts. You have to know how Ethernet works too. Because despite Troy's protestations to the contrary, once it goes over the wire and off the antenna, it's Ethernet, buddy. If you ever figure out how to fling a token through the air, I'd love to see that. But we talk a lot about how to make troubleshooting more approachable for people. We talk about using soft skills to get people more engaged in the troubleshooting process and helping them understand all the complexities that they have to deal with. Talk about where to find the knowledge, how to create more knowledge. But could we ever find ourselves in a situation where the systems don't need to troubleshoot anymore because they just basically fix themselves?
Man, I hope.
It sure did. So my dad is a mechanic and was a mechanic for his entire life. And he asked the exact same question in the 80s when they started putting these newfangled computers into cars. Oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to work on these things again. Yet here we are, how many decades later, and you know what? You still need mechanics. You still need technicians that know how to go replace cams. You still need to be able to go, the mechanics of it all still have to function, and you still have to have skills related to the underpinnings of what it is you're doing. You can't automate a wrench as much as you might like to try. And I think the same thing happens in our industry.
I think we need to understand the difference, though, because I bet your dad, other than working on your Camaro, hasn't had to twist the distributor cap to top dead center.
True. well,
because
like,
some pieces of his job were taken over by the AI, the computer, but
Very much.
other pieces can't be.
Yep.
And it's knowing that. So if you were like I love tuning cars, well, yeah, that's kind of gone.
computers.
Yeah.
There's a that's
But I mean, doing it, with your apprentice.
if that's gone, then there are no speed shops left.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
As much as it's taken stuff away, it's also created new.
Totally.
Yeah.
and it's not a problem. I mean, I think you see it on Reddit or Twitter or wherever. People are like afraid of AI taking jobs, but it's not going to take jobs. It's going to free us up because that the low hanging stuff, right? Again, I keep talking about low hanging fruit. That stuff is it may get automated away, some of that, and that's fine. How you're like, if you think about your networks, your customer networks, how much stuff is there that you can go fix, but you just don't have the time to? It's like working all right, but the optimization that you can then go out and take care of other things, other issues, you can dive deeper, you can blog more because you've got more time now. That kind of stuff is great. That the automation stuff excites me because I get a lot of time back.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen it in years, any technology, the cotton gin, the plow, it was a force multiplier. It allowed people to spend more time doing things that weren't back-breaking, soul-crushing work, and giving people that opportunity created lots of other things, like creating problems. Scott?
Well, while this is the idea behind that, I think is great, and I like it in theory, it creates another set of problems because then we start doing things like we build all these overlays, like say Wi-Fi or VXLANs, and we have all of this stuff, and then we've got all this automation that does all these things, and then when something breaks underneath, the newer people in the industry have no idea how the underlying stuff works, and we lose the capability completely to troubleshoot that because nobody has the knowledge anymore. And so we don't really necessarily see some of that in, like, say, the cars, because when it comes down to it, yes, there's some technology built on top of the car, at least at this point, but the underlying engine and stuff, that still all needs the maintenance, and that still has its own, gets touched regularly. But if we start getting so much automation in place that nobody's ever touching our underlying pieces, who's going to actually know how to fix those underlying pieces when they do break because something weird happened? And that's kind of one of my concerns, is like people get taught all the latest and greatest stuff, and the fundamentals sometimes are kind of ignored because it's like, oh, you don't need to know that anymore. The AI handles all of it.
Sean, David, do you guys want to jump in? Because you've been awful quiet.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. I thought Scott, touched on something interesting, right, with the automation and things that happen. I think knowing how all those underpinnings work and what's being automated and how it's being automated, I think making sure we answer those questions, or if we don't know them, we're asking those questions, I think is important to understand the process better. And then, when things don't work, I mean, I know none of us here have ever run into a software bug, but like understanding that that's what it is and not something else will save you a tremendous amount of time, right? Like versus chasing like a ghost in the network or whatever it is, right? So I do think it's important to make sure that we are asking those questions, are educating ourselves constantly, and and our customers or coworkers or whatever that dynamic is on how some of this works, and sort of meeting them where they are to help them be a better tool. I think there's a huge human element that a lot of times as technologists, people jump straight to packets and frames, which is great to understand what's happening there, but I've also seen just people aren't using the Wi-Fi and how it was designed, right?
I mean, I got a complaint about the Wi-Fi here at the hotel. It sucks. I can't do anything. Well, turns out it wasn't the Wi-Fi. It was the internet connection at the hotel. So, people are always going to complain about something. Go ahead.
I'd like to
David.
double down on the whole automation as well. I think a lot of, specifically people like what we saw with YBot yesterday, where it will make suggestions with regards to kind of issues that you've kind of experienced and what their kind of suggestion is. And I think a lot of these industry hardware and software vendors, especially something like Cisco DNA or Center, whichever one you want to call it, will highlight issues and then promptly suggest resolutions to those issues. So I think definitely having an understanding of, coming across these problems, what you should kind of understand at a granular level and not just be informed by a robot with AI, for example. I think it will slowly start to remove a lot of troubleshooting that we will do over a period of time. And I think, yeah, we probably will eventually lose quite generally basic knowledge when it comes to troubleshooting. And I think it'll just progress up more so than anything.
All right. Well, I think we'll probably wrap it here. Because, you know, troubleshooting something is not going to go away. Whether you're a computer engineer, a doctor, car mechanic, you know, whatever it is, there's always a system that's going to need to be fixed. They're always going to be complex. We're maybe not going to understand everything that they do, but we need to get better at helping other people understand that too, because they're never going to stop saying my knee hurts or it's making a clunking sound. We need to help them understand that this clunk is one thing and this error message is a different.